Hello everybody, Noobly57 and welcome to Can I Beat Project 06 as Tails? No, but trust me, the reasons are really interesting, so stick around and let's start off with... Okay, first level, Wave Ocean, and yeah, this is a definite no. I couldn't get past the first section, so on to... And this one is actually a surprisingly yes. When I did this challenge, I thought the sand would be a big issue, but actually, you could just keep jumping and you'll get out for most of this level. You go through it like normal. Well, it's not normal, playing as Tails in the Sonic section can go anyway. In fact, sometimes it's even easier than normal like this section, where I can just skip right past all the enemies. Most of the level is just using springs and dash rings to skip through most of the level. Here I use Tails' flight to skip right past the annoying platforming and this big gap. And we are at the goal ring, so Sonic's Dusty Desert is doable. Now, on to... And in this level, normally you start off on a snowboard, but Tails forgot to bring us today, so he's going on foot. I decided to take this shortcut here because I don't know, I just felt like it, I guess. This is the point where I found out Tails can actually grind rails, which will be helpful later on. This I'm not too proud of, but I kept on dying to the big snowball, but eventually I got through and the rest of the snowboarding section was all good. Now that we are in the next section, I used Tails' fake rings to kill a couple enemies and the ice storm. And I found my twin. These fake rings carried a lot of this level. Now we're back on Tails' section, yada yada yada, you know this part can be beaten. Now back to Sonic, and I just need to dodge some lasers horribly, grind some rails, and I was at the goal. So Sonic's Flight Acropolis is doable. Moving on to... my favourite level in all of 06, Crisis City. And we start out with Sonic riding on a burning piece of the road, but Tails didn't feel like scolding his feet today, so he just did his best. For the entire snowboarding section, you play it like it's normal. Now we're on the normal section, and it's pretty basic at the beginning, grinding, and jump off, using springs and dash rings to go ahead just a bit quicker. In order to skip this light dash section, I just flown around it, and the rest of the section was easy. Now moving on to the sky section, and this is where I had to get creative, as Tails cannot wall jump or swing on lampposts. So in order to get around those, I just flew. Yeah, this video is going flying a lot. Next up is a little bit of tricky platforming, and after a few deaths I found out I can actually fly and land on certain obstacles in this wall jumping section. And then we reach the Mach Speed section, which sadly, at the end of it there is an invisible wall that stops the players all movement except jumping. So sadly, Crisis City is not doable. That means we move on to... This level starts off with us launching off some springs and running through 2 loop-de-loops before running off the side of this wall and hitting this dash ring, making you remember, oh, I can't wall jump, and just barely making it back to land, and skipping this entire platforming section. After feeding those hordes of enemies, this door opens and I need to kill these Iblis takers to open yet another door. I cheese my way through this whole section and kill this whole horde again with more rings. More flying later, I launch myself into the volcano. Once in the volcano, I cheese my way through most of it by just flying. Once I grind on this rail, I hit this invincibility, and fall through the hole to reveal a puzzle. There's going to be a lot of puzzles, so don't you worry. This one is simple. I just hit the purple orbs to move on. So I did just that. After hitting this switch to open the door, I used springs and grind rails to reach Knuckles' section. This was pretty easy, as all I had to do was hit the orbs with my fake rings and I was free. A few springs later, I reach yet another hole, but this time it leads me to the goal, so Sonic's Flame Core is doable. Firing on over to... We start off by speeding off to catch up to a train. We are aided by dash rings and springs to reach the first combat area, and we easily find the lever and hit it with some fake rings. Skipping a lot of this level using fly, we very quickly reach the next combat area and we find the lever instantly, but that's where the fun ends, as you have to wall jump around to get to this section and Tails simply cannot do that. and he cannot fly there either, so Sonic's radical train is not doable. Swinging into... This starts off with launching us into a fairly hollow tree and then launch back out into a half pipe made out of wood that shoots us into a vine that we can't grab. Oh no. Luckily there was a spring that brings us back to the top, allowing us to continue forward. Phasing through yet another vine, I decided I actually had to get creative with this and how I pass it. After around 6 minutes of trying, I eventually got past it and was able to make it into the cave section, only to be greeted by an impossible jump once I get out, so tropical jungle is not doable. Grinding on over to... The first level is pretty simple at the beginning. Kill some enemies, grind some rails, the usual. The first obstacle happens just after the wind switch, where normally you use the tightrope to bounce yourself up onto the platform. But I guess Tails is so bad at balancing that he just phases right through them. But luckily, the platform I needed to reach is just enough for Tails to fly onto them and continue. But right after that we found another issue. Tails can't use a hawk, but thankfully this hawk took us to a platform below that we can easily fly to. After a bit more careful flying we reach another hawk, but we can just skip him and hit this spring off to the side. After riding the wall and launching ourselves off these springs, launching into a dash ring, we hit another hawk.
Leave me alone!
And here's where I thought this was over, because I couldn't see a clear path where this hawk would have taken me. But after a while I decided to take a risk and found myself in a loading zone. But sadly after all this effort I get blocked by an invisible wall and some telekinesis, so Sonic's Kingdom Valley is not doable. Bouncing into... And my twin is back, but so is the lasers. Luckily in this level I found out that Tails can do a normal attack, so now I don't have to use the fake rings constantly. A lot of this level is just going through this level like normal, so I'll just focus on the interesting stuff as to not make this video too long. As of writing this, I am currently 7,157 characters in, and I haven't finished Sonic's story, so I need to hurry it up. Knuckles' section was pretty easy, as I could just fly to the switch and activate it, and after running and defeating a whole bunch of enemies, we have reached the goal, so Aquatic Base is doable. Now, onto the secret level. Yeah, this one is clearly beatable. You play as Tails and don't switch from him ever in the level, so you just throw the rank on screen. Yeah, now on to... First level is White Acropolis, and this is pretty simple. It's mostly just flying and hitting some enemies and occasionally hitting lights. But we did get this funny scene.
Haha, Dr. Eggman is no match for me. Shadow, why you?
It's a request from the President. I didn't know that you were the agent who failed to infiltrate the location.
Come on, don't underestimate Rouge the Bat. I got in successfully and got the treasure too. I was only a little slow getting out.
But overall, this was a pretty solid level, not too difficult. With high hopes, let's move on to... Oh no. Yeah, I immediately die, but I did get a T-pose and Tails, so let's move on to... We start off with grinding on a rail and going down some buildings, nothing special. Most of this level is pretty normal. I can even do section 2 really easily, until we get to the hang gliding section where I fall to my death and cannot continue, so Crisis City is not doable. On to... Flame Core starts off with Tails going through some loops and running through the level, mostly like normal, and the Purple Orb section was really easily done. Overall, a pretty easy stage to do. Now on to... For this, I went through as normal, but as soon as I got to this section with a barrier, I had no idea what to do, so I guess it's impossible. Now, we move on to... This level starts out with beating up a bunch of enemies to get across to this spring that launches me up to the next section with Silver. But of course, we can't use Silver, so we just replace him with Tails. And this is a pretty easy section as I just kill a couple enemies to unlock this laser door, to get to this section with a bunch of lasers, and I just fly through all of it and hit the switch to open the door, and we are back to Shadow's section. And it's just a fly through, I guess, base, as all it really is just defeating enemies and breaking glass. Nothing really that special. And with those final enemies defeated, the gold ring in sight, I beat the level. This wasn't really that hard in all of itself, and with that, aquatic base is doable. Now with that, let's move on to... This starts off with a jet glider section with walls way too high to even fly to the top of, so sadly, Wave Ocean is not doable. Now, on to... And I thought, oh no, this is going to be impossible. But no, turns out this level, they sink slowly enough just for Tails to jump out and fly. So, I spammed it until I got inside the temple. Once inside the temple, it was very easy to kill a couple of enemies, lots of sand waves, and get to Omega section. And this section is really easy, just defeat some enemies, hit the switch, and it's done. Back to Shadow. There's nothing really too interesting, I just flew over everything and got to the goal. And with that, Dusty Desert is doable. Now for the extra. Okay, this one I'm not too proud of, but I just tried flying over the invisible barrier to the goal and couldn't and gave up. So yeah. Anyway, let's move on to... First up, the home of our beloved hedgehog, Crisis City. In this first section it was pretty smooth, with only a couple precise flight movements. And Blazer section is even easier with just a couple jumps. And just a few minutes later in Silver section, we reach the goal and Crisis City is doable. Let's move on to the beautiful landscape of... And this level gave me a hard time. Not for the difficulty, but the lag, oh my. It was okay, it was very few, but when it did, you could tell the motion blur goes crazy. Like, look at this. But apart from that, I literally just flew over the entire stage, so yeah, it's possible. At this point I thought, oh, it'll be easy, I've gotten 2 out of 2 so far, this will be great. Then... This was the point where issues started to arise. It started off normal, defeating enemies, using dummy rings to knock all the balls into the holes, flying. Amy's section was a breeze to get through, but eventually I was stopped by this door that you need to use telekinesis on. And no, I tried clipping through, but unlike Retail 06, there are very few bugs in Project 06, so Dusty Desert is not doable. On to... This level starts out pretty normal, just defeating some enemies and sniping some lights, only to figure out that I could have just flown to the exit. This means that White Acropolis is doable. Now on to... This level starts off with dropping us into the level and defeating a couple enemies. After flying around a bit, I felt like this was the easiest level to beat. Now, the Trio of Doom, starting with... I'll go quickly with these ones as to not drag it on as much as it already is. Okay, so this is really easy until you get stopped by this laser wall from telekinesis. Not doable. Starts off as normal, but as soon as we get to these bars, you get stuck because you guessed it, telekinesis. Not doable. Starts off normal and blocked by this wall by telekinesis. Not doable. Now, on to... In this, you can go through as normal, though some funny things did happen, like my recording running out of space, so that was fun, but apart from that, it was pretty normal. And that is all. I want to say a huge thank you to Stelmo98 for the inspiration, with his Can You Beat Project 06 as Mach Speed Sonic, so be sure to subscribe to him. He isn't that small, but still subscribe to him. He's an amazing person and his content is great, and if you love Sonic 06 or Project 06, then he is an amazing creator. And thank you for Chaos X for even making the game. Please go support him if you can. As well as Beats for making the character swap mod. Without him, this wouldn't have even been possible. And if you want, here's the complete list of everything. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.